The toe forward. So Wayne is the Russell V. Long Professor in the Political Science Department. His areas of expertise are Southern politics and Louisiana government. And his most recent book, according to the website at least, is Inside the Carnival, Unmasking Louisiana Politics. And there's been a recent update to that to include information about Hurricane Katrina and its aftermath. So maybe there will be a Gustav Ike edition as well. So Wayne, thank you for being here, and take it away.
It's great to be here. I know a lot of you, and you were, and it's funny to say this generally, but you were some of my favorite people, so I feel really good being here. I am sandwiched between Gaines Foster and Cecil Eubanks, who I'm pointing to his spouse, Judy, who's seated behind Gaines, who, Gaines, I assume, and I wish I'd been here, gave sort of the historical context of the relationship between religion and politics in the States, and Cecil, who's a longtime friend, in fact, my first political science instructor, and I still have his notebook in my desk. But I'm sure will give up one of his usual thoughtful philosophical connections between the two, as Gaines was thoughtful as well. But that's sort of the point. And I mean, Gaines and I are both sort of masters of self-deprecation. This isn't just self-deprecation. But I'm going to talk about the superficial. I'm going to talk the politics, and that's going to bug you a little bit, because you're going to go, but that doesn't make sense, and it's like, I know it doesn't make sense, but that appears to be the way it developed. I mean, it's easy to say that in the middle of a political period, the type of political period we are now, in the midst of this election, when a lot of things sort of don't seem to make sense, but that's the way they seem to develop. So what I want to discuss is the way religion has framed the transformation of American politics, and the argument I want to set up because of the transformation of Southern politics in the last 20 or 30 years. And then I want to go on to why that might be changing this election. And then if we have a little time, and I'll change the subject a little bit and talk about the role of religion in the more recent transformation, and it is more recent transformation of Louisiana politics, which really has only been in the last, the latest version really has only been in the last decade or so. But what I want to begin with is just laying out the book du jour in political science is about 5 years old, and the response to that. It's that one political science book that many of you may have heard of. But because the people are always discussing it on NPR, and they're always in the almost any reference to what's going on in politics. And that book is What's the Matter with Kansas by Thomas Frank. And What's the Matter with Kansas is an argument that's would be fairly familiar to my generation, baby boom generation, born in '55. And that argument made so much sense to us because we grew up when politics was defined by the New Deal era and the Solid South. And the New Deal era meant that Democrats during most of the century, the appeal of Democrats was economic, working class union, and the appeal of Republicans was economic, more pro-business and a little, policies that helped those. And we grew up that way, even if we were in the Solid South. We knew that outside the Solid South, that's what sort of defined the parties. What Frank does in What's the Matter with Kansas, he clearly looks at politics that way, and he goes, all these working class people in Kansas are voting Republican. What's the matter with them? What's going on with that? And I try not to do things in a partisan way, and he ain't his conclusions are fairly partisan. It's like they're idiots, you know. Is essentially what he says, and you know, he says they're voting on these other issues, these cultural issues and stuff, and they're voting against their own self-interest. And a lot of us might feel that way, growing up when we did. It's like, yeah, what are these working class people doing? What are you Republican, you know? And that argument had a lot of resonance in political science, but actually in the sort of the NPR world, and I'm not saying liberal-leaning NPR, just the sort of informed citizen world, people, baby boom citizen world. It's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But he was taken on by a guy at Harvard, Larry Bartell, who wrote this great review a couple of years ago. The great title. What's the matter with cancer? It's like, what's wrong? If you want to look at the transformation of politics in the U.S., you don't look at Kansas and working class people in Kansas. If you look at national data over the last 30 years, Bartels argues, working class people haven't changed that much. And he cites all this data, as we tend to do. And so if you want to see why politics changed how politics was transformed in the last 30 years, you look at the South. Because that's where the realignment was. And that's really the only place where the realignment was. And that's the only place where it was substantial. And he essentially makes, and I even brought the quote if any of you are interested. Well, in fact, let me, because he's so concise with this. And again, it would resonate with a lot of the people in the audience that are closer to my age. And it makes a lot of sense. He goes, to a good approximation then, the overall decline in Democratic support among voters in Frank's white working class over the past century is entirely, and he italicizes that, entirely attributable to the demise of the Solid South as a bastion of Democratic allegiance. In the first half of the 20th century, the historical legacy of the Civil War and the contemporary reality of Jim Crow racial politics induced Southern whites to maintain unquestioning, overwhelming majorities of the Democratic Party. And I see heads shaking. It's like a lot of my generation in the South understands that. However, dramatic action on civil rights issues by national Democratic leaders in the early 1960s precipitated a momentous electoral shift among white Southerners, eventually replacing the Democratic majority with a much less strong Republican majority. And what he's talking about is something that a lot of my generation knows, and a lot of LSU people should know. Hubert Humphrey, who I like to mention all the time, because he got his master's degree in political science from LSU, in our department. And when he was here for that couple of years, he came down to study Huey Long and populism, but what he found, and we were lucky enough to have a speechwriter here for a while, was racism instead, and it was abhorrent to him. And he wrote his wife, and he said, "Don't come down to Baton Rouge," you know. And so he eventually, and Gaines probably told a more complete version of something like this. Eventually went to the 48 convention, gave that stirring speech of and the Democrats were leading up to this. Gave that stirring speech at the Democratic convention. It's a very quotable speech, actually. We're all Americans, sort of thing. And